Gentleman from New York is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. To be clear, the Department of Justice has not been weaponized. What's been weaponized is a radical, right-wing, runaway, illegitimate Supreme Court majority taking away long-held freedoms from the American people. That's what's been weaponized. Mr. Olson, Attorney General Garland testified that the greatest domestic threat facing the United States comes from racially or ethnically motivated violent extremists. Do you agree with that statement?
Look, I agree that I can't say which type of ideology, because there's a mix of ideologies that often form the domestic terrorism threat. I do think that the rise in domestic terrorism from a range of ideologies is a significant concern.
So in recent years, we've seen a significant uptick in violent attacks, in many cases perpetrated by white supremacists. According to a 2020 report by the Center for Strategic and International Studies, white supremacists conducted 67% of terrorist plots and attacks in the United States. Is that figure consistent with what you've seen in terms of the rise of domestic terrorist attacks?
I don't know that exact report. I do know that our intelligence community has said that the most significant number of attacks come from two sets of ideologies, racially motivated and anti-government, and those are the two that are most likely to result in lethal attacks.
Has there been any understanding as to why we've seen sort of a rise in, organized, racially motivated domestic terrorist activity?
I think there are studies to look at the potentially many factors that give rise to this threat. I would note that it's not new. It goes back, obviously, to the beginning of the country. In fact, the Department of Justice was founded in part to take on the KKK. So it's not a new challenge, but it is one that has increased in recent years.
It's not a new challenge, certainly, but it's newly resonant, and that's a very troubling development. What role does social media play in the ability to sort of radicalize potentially hundreds of thousands, if not millions of Americans with respect to this violent extremism that we're seeing increase in its resonance?
I think it's a significant challenge, Congressman. I think the intelligence agencies that look at this have assessed that the way social media works, it can accelerate an individual's move from being radicalized to even mobilizing to violence because of the exposure to online content that can happen at such a quick pace, so that individuals are radicalized quickly and often radicalized in ways that are difficult to detect because they're consuming this content by themselves or in very small groups.
Now, with respect to the January 6th attack, am I correct that there were several white supremacist organizations like the Oath Keepers and Proud Boys that seemingly played a prominent role in the horrific events of that fateful day?
I mean, there's no doubt that individuals who identify themselves as members of those groups that you mentioned, Oath Keepers and Proud Boys, were present, and many of them have been charged in indictments here in Washington, D.C., including 2 separate indictments that charge the crime of seditious conspiracy.
Is it also fair to say that the Oath Keepers and Proud Boys are increasingly targeting people within law enforcement or former law enforcement personnel, or in some cases, people within the military or former military personnel?
We certainly do look at whether individuals within these groups espouse those types of ideologies. Look, we're looking at individuals. Some of them self-identify as being members of those groups, but we don't look at those groups as groups. We look at individuals who may in fact conspire with other individuals who are self-identified as members of those groups to see if they've committed criminal acts, and that's how we look at those cases.
And given this rise in racially motivated violent extremism, how is the Department of Justice or your particular division working with state and local law enforcement officials to try to prevent, to the best extent possible, things like the massacre at Mother Emanuel Church or the massacre at the Tree of Life Synagogue, or most recently, the massacre at a supermarket in Buffalo, New York?
It's a really important question because when it comes to this type of violence, it's almost certainly going to be the state and local first responders who are going to be first on the scene, and in many cases, they will ultimately prosecute these cases. So the partnership between the FBI and state and local police, as well as at the prosecutorial level, is critical to addressing this challenge. We do training. The FBI is often in a support role from an investigative standpoint, sometimes in a primary role. Some of these cases are ultimately prosecuted in federal court based on federal charges, but many cases are prosecuted in state court. So we need to make sure that we're all playing at the same level.
Thank you.